Fantastic. Nick is already ready. Nick Newman is Senior Research Associate at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, housed at Oxford University. Nick is one of the rock stars behind the Digital News Report. But in fact, Nick produces a lot of reports. And today he's going to talk about everything about voice and what are the implications for news of voice devices.
Thank you, Federica. Let me start with an apology. So I don't know much about R, so I've made all these charts lovingly in PowerPoint. So it won't be as good, but that was an awesome presentation. It's really good to be here. These slides, by the way, I've tweeted out, so you can refer to them during or later, as you like. And I'm going to talk about voice-activated speakers. Just for people who don't know, the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, it's part of Oxford University, so Thomson Reuters lends its name. And what I do there is I do a lot of work on the intersection of journalism and technology, so Digital News Report, Trends and Predictions, and this is a report that we did on voice in November, and I was particularly interested in it because I felt that there was a real gap. There's a huge amount of hype about voice-activated speakers. The platforms aren't giving us data or information, and there's a whole load of questions that we really need to know if we're going to make informed decisions. And so we don't know much about how the devices are used in homes and what they're used for. We don't know much specifically about how news is used in those environments. So a lot of people talk about, how you use it for music, but not for news. And we don't know for people who don't have them why they're not having them. We just get a lot of hype. And so the point of this research was to look at it in lots of different ways. So we went into people's homes, we did qualitative research, we did some special surveys in the US and the UK, and we also talked to the platforms, and we talked to publishers as well. So it was a sort of real 360 to try and get at some of these really key questions, I think, because, as I say, there's a lot of hype. What do we know? So one of the hype lines, voice-activated speakers are growing faster than the smartphone at a similar stage, and our data doesn't quite show them going as fast as some other surveys. This is taken from a Digital News Report, and it looks at 3 countries where smart speakers have been around for longer, so Germany, UK, and US. Broadly, they're kind of doubling year on year. So the first 2 are from Digital News Report, and the last one is from a study we did in November. And what does that mean in terms of numbers? Somewhere between 14% in the US is somewhere between 30 and 50 million devices. UK, 10% is probably around 7 million devices, something like that. So a substantial number of people have these things. And in terms of the backstory, you'll remember Amazon launched it first and really kept it in the US and a couple of countries to start with. It's now, and in the last year or so, it's really gone out into many more countries, so Spanish-speaking countries, India, France. Google Home, 2 years behind, actually, but you can see now in terms of the number of countries they're in. They're in 19 countries. Many of them launched at the back end of last year. Some of the Nordic countries, a lot of European countries, Google Home is now in. And then, a little bit late, 2018, Apple HomePod, now in 8 countries. It was a delayed launch, of course. So just a quick show of hands. Who has an Echo device? So that's about a third of the room, I guess. Who has a Google device? A little bit less, but quite a lot. And who has an Apple? Spot 'em. Okay. How representative are you guys? So this is UK data from January this year, and broadly it shows that most people in the UK have an Amazon device, so the market share is around 77%, Google about 20%. Interestingly, there's a lot of these screen devices that have been released that they're trying to sell us, not selling very well. So in total, only around 11%. So they're basically trying to get developers to develop for the screen. That's not where the action is right now. That's what the statistics tell you. And the Apple HomePod, only about 3% currently have the Apple Home Hub. But the key point here is this is not about smart speakers for me. So in my view, they may be a bit of an interim device. They're clearly replacing radios in the home. But I think what's interesting is that the intelligent assistants that live inside these devices, like the Alexa, like the Google Assistant, and like Siri, hey Siri, just wait, I always wanted to do that. Nothing happened. obviously now live in all kinds of things, many of them with screens, and some of them recently launched. This has absolutely changed my life. It really has changed my media habits. So Bose headphones with Google Assistant and Alexa inside. You literally ask for what you want wherever you are. It will play you your podcast. It will play you the news. It takes the friction away, and I am listening to so much more audio as a result. It's going into cars, both their own manufacturers, but also Google and Amazon, and then little interim devices as well. So the point, and of course the phones. So people are learning about how to do this in the smart speaker, and then they're going back and trying it on the phones that, of course, already have this integrated. So the point is that voice activation is going to be a layer of everything. It is going to be a huge disruptor for media. It's in home, it's in car, it's in ear. It's going to be in everything. That sounded like hype, didn't it? Sorry. But we need to distinguish that. Anyway, how people feel about smart speakers today. So when we went into people's homes, I was quite surprised. I found people who, they were early adopters, but they really, really loved them. They had huge smiles on their faces, and they talked about the speed with which they could do things. Turn on the radio. Okay, it only saves them a few seconds, but they can do that. The thrill of feeling futuristic. We spoke to a taxi driver who was in his 70s who had never mastered a smartphone. And within a week, he had learnt how to talk to this thing and was using it every day to turn on the radio, to tell jokes, all the rest of it. It's useful. It enables new behaviors. And one of the things that I didn't expect, I think the manufacturers of these devices didn't expect, is that it's fun. That actually it's a very social experience. The speaker, you're interacting with it, the whole family gets involved. And that's we need to think about how we might create experiences for the social element of these speakers. The other really big insight for me going to people's homes was just seeing how many remote controls people had. So, some of them had like 7, 8, 9, 10 just stacked up, different remote controls for all these devices they had. I think it will kill the remote control. Just the ease with which you can use it. And people hated those remote controls. They're really hard to operate. And the ease with which you can get to a piece of media on the television or through the radio, through just asking for it is clearly meeting an unmet need. The other thing is people just told us all the time, I'm fed up with screens, I want to get away from screens. So the audio aspect of it is critical, which is one reason why the screens aren't selling so well. So here's just a few people we talked to talking about this control that they feel with these devices.
I like the convenience of it. I don't like to type or read that much, and especially when I'm on the go and I'm out, it's much easier to just ask something.
Here's the thing, right? We're on our phone so much that our heads are constantly down, our fingers are tired. There's so many, you pick up your phone, you get distracted. With the voice, I like that there's nothing that's going to distract me. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying what I'm saying, and it gets done.
So that idea of just asking something and getting something back. Barriers, obviously, there are lots of barriers to usage right now. The biggest one was privacy. When we talked to people in focus groups in particular who hadn't got these devices, they all talked about privacy all the time. This fear that you're being spied on. In some cases, people who already got them, who weren't using them as a result of privacy concerns. But then actually, when by the end of the focus group, they'd almost all talked themselves out of it and said, well, we've already given up all of our data to Facebook anyway. And I'm not a terrorist. Basically the two arguments that people used. So my conclusion from talking to a lot of people who had them and didn't have them is fundamentally for most people, probably not for hacks and hackers, but for most people, the convenience of these things trumps the concerns about privacy. And so most people, although it will stop some people, it's not going to stop most people. Okay, what about news? So the headline is, news is not as important as we might hope. So and this is consistent through a whole load of polls, what are people using them for? They're basically using them to play music, to ask them very quick questions, to get the weather, and to set alarms and maybe make lists. So that's fundamentally what people are using it for. They say they're using it for news, but actually when you ask them to prove it by looking at the app, they probably did once last Wednesday for a few seconds. So there's the news usage is very, very light. Here's the proof. We asked them, what is the most valued feature? And only 1% say news. whereas 61% says music. That's certainly true for me in terms of how I value it. What do we mean by news on these devices? What are people doing? So 3 types of things. You ask for news, you get it back. That's the kind of flash briefing or narrative briefing style. Then there's basically live radio, so turn on the radio or play me a podcast. And then there's sort of something in between, which we're still learning what that is. It could be interactive, conversational. Those are the 3 types. The first one, so give me the headlines. We found in the survey we did in the UK, less than 1 in 5 owners are using it daily. So 21%, 18% in the US. So more people will use it monthly. As I say, it's quite light usage. And the main reason when you ask people is, why would I? I've got news coming out my ears. It's coming out of the smartphones. I don't need any more news on this device. You know, the case has not been made. Secondly, the content is not right. In many cases, an offshoot from radio or something that's done in a synthesized voice. It's the wrong length. It hasn't really been thought of in the context that people want this stuff. And the final one is it's really hard to discover. So I don't know how many people have set this, but when you first do it, it comes up with options, and most people just stick with a default. Or even if you've done it, you don't know how to change that default. It's almost impossible to change the default and find that. So the platforms have done a really bad job on discovery. Here's the proof. In the UK, 64% are using BBC News for the flash briefings. That's because it is the default, and it's really hard to get new things discovered, essentially. In general, anyway, broadcasters are dominating, not just in the UK, but where else we looked at this. And that's, natural. People expect audio to come from broadcasters at this stage. So it's much harder for others. And only 23% said they'd ever changed the default. So the problem of discovery is absolutely huge for new players here. Having said all that, passive radio is already here today on these speakers. It's already incredibly important. So 60% in the UK said they're using it for listening to live radio. That frictionless thing I talked about, you just say, play Radio 5 Live, it does so. I use it all the time. In the States, National Public Radio say that 19% of their online listening, so that will include mobile and computer, now comes from smart speakers, and that is additional. It was a few percentage a year ago, so that's how fast it's growing. If you're in the radio business, you have to be on smart speakers today because they are radio replacements. However, podcasts are not yet working on the smart speakers, so only 5 to 6% of podcasts listening. This comes from a January poll from YouGov. Comes via these devices. Some of the publishers we talked to said it was as low as 2%. Why is that? Because podcasts, a lot of people listen to them when they're on the go. So these speakers are fixed. They're not in the right place. And people want them in their ears at the time they want them, fundamentally. And the discovery problem, of course, is the other thing. You ask for a podcast, it doesn't understand you a lot of the time. So finally, how are publishers thinking about this opportunity or challenge? Here are some thoughts. So this is one of my favorite pictures. This is one publisher in Germany are just going all in on voice. So this is editorial meetings are held around an Alexa. They have them put in the washrooms to educate their staff about the value of these things. And they've started a flash briefing. It's all part of the change process, part of the hype curve, I guess. BBC is investing incredibly hard in this. So a lot of money, a lot of product teams, thinking not just about content and formats, but thinking about how you actually shape the future of this platform. How do you create technical frameworks that allow interactive conversations? Don't just leave it to the platforms. How can you do something? So that's because they believe it's critical. And if you're in broadcasting or audio, this is your future. You have to be there today. Not just for news. You saw an example of some of the children's stuff they've done recently. But if you are, if you're not a broadcaster, if you come from a legacy print background, for example, like The Guardian, it's much more difficult to get in there early. You don't have a lot of audio to play with. It's very expensive. A number of reasons we identified why other publishers are holding back. So firstly, there is less money for innovation than there was a few years ago. So it only goes on the top 3 priorities. And voice is not currently one of the top 3 priorities, partly because there's not enough data about it. Secondly, there is no clear path to monetization. These companies have been burned before by platforms coming along saying, here's a bright new thing. It is the future. You better get in early. Fear of missing out, and people did, and now people are much more skeptical of that. So they want to see the money, they want to see the path to monetization first before they invest. The problems of discovery and awareness that I talked about first, why would you go in there if people can't find it? If the tools for discovery on the platform are so poor that the only way you can do it is using external tools. And then finally, as I said at the beginning, the platforms are not giving publishers enough data to know how this is being used and whether it's possible to invest. How can you make sensible decisions without it? So people are being cautious. Of course, The Guardian, and I think they're here tonight, from the Voice Lab, are investing in voice, but they're doing it because Google are giving them money to do so, because that's the current business model, right? And then other people are downright scared of the platforms. So the whole idea that when you were searching something on a computer, you would have 20 blue links, and then on a smartphone it was about 7, so you could see the choices, and in voice, it's 1. The computer decides, the platform decides. So there's right now, you see this because Google are going to launch this atomized search. So instead of news briefings, it will be individual stories. And so publications like the Evening Standard are creating these little audio segments which respond to Google queries, like how many Brexit votes have there been tonight? And they will instantly give you an answer in audio. But the question is, which one are you going to get? Are you going to get the Standard? Are you going to get the BBC? Who decides under what circumstances? Where's the transparency? And that's the sort of thing that concerns a lot of publishers. This is different because you have to give one answer because of the frictionless nature of it. So finally, what should publishers do now? How do you deal with this new platform that is both disruptive but also not here yet in terms of monetization? So I think the first thing is you have to develop a strategy for voice. You have to think about why it matters for your organization, and you crucially have to think about how it overlaps with audio. It's obviously a distribution platform for things like podcasts, another distribution platform for audio. But it's much more than that. It's also an opportunity to create completely different experiences. How does it fit in with your business model? How does it map to your business model? How does it fit in with your values? Which area are you going to play in these different things, in these different areas? Critically, there's no point in just following what the BBC are doing or what The Guardian is doing. You have to be different because the BBC is going to own that space of the immediate briefing. So you have to provide something that is valuable to your users in a different way. There is going to be plenty of opportunity because there are lots of opportunities in this space. It's going to be the gateway to everything. But you have to think of it in that way. Think about the discovery from the start. So a lot of great examples that are out there right now recognize you can't get discovered on platforms, so they have to use their other channels to make sure that you can do an experiment and get discovered that way. Fourthly, experiment and iterate. I don't need to tell that to hacks and hackers. Everything's changing all the time on these platforms, literally week by week. The quality of the synthesized voices, for example, things that were not possible last week are suddenly going to be possible. So you need to have experts in your organization. Could be one person, could be a team of people who are thinking about it and keeping an eye on what's changing and the right linkages in with the decision makers. And then finally, I think, work with other publishers to make sure to keep the platforms honest, to make sure you get better data, and to make sure that you can help shape the future of this thing in the right way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. We have time for a couple of questions.
Hi, I'm from CNN Digital. You mentioned in the presentation that kind of older people were latching on to the voice devices, but I was wondering if you had any insights as to how younger millennials and Generation Z were responding.
Yeah, it's not like the smartphone, which is very much young. So the curve is actually for older or from 35 plus, but we did find young people who are using them, and I'm not sure we talked to enough to have a sort of clear view that it's kind of different. It's just young people are used to using digital media. They're used to they love podcasts, for example. So they're using these devices in multiple ways. They're using them to. So we spoke to somebody who was using the podcasts in their ears, a little bit like I was, but also when they got home in the living room, and they're also it's changing their behaviours. Sometimes they have them in the bedrooms as well. So I'm not sure we got enough information to know precisely how, because these things are emerging.
Hi. Oh, that's loud. Is there a possibility that this could essentially turn out a bit like the pivot to video, where
Yes.
so everyone went a bit mad for it and then it didn't really work out in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's pivoting to audio right now, and to podcasts, and obviously that's kind of it's because there's an opportunity in audio because of the headphones and the smartphones, and because young people are really using all those things and are out and about. All of these things together mean that there is an opportunity in audio, but obviously you can kill that opportunity by everyone piling in, and then there's too much supply and the demand hasn't gone up enough. So I think that's what's happening. But there is, I think, a lot of opportunity in audio, and I think there's loads of opportunity here. But I think we're in a stage of overhype. So currently, I think this year we're going to start to see disappointment. We're going to see some of those sales curves slow down. We're going to see people talking about getting rid of their smart devices because they're not providing enough value. But that's not to say that I don't think there's value in this. I absolutely do. I think this is a game changer from an access point of view. I don't necessarily think that smart speakers are going to be the future themselves.
Hi.
Hello.
You mentioned I'm Camila Costa. I work for the BBC.
Hi.
You mentioned it briefly, but what kind of studies are there about the way children use it? Because the way what I've seen so far is that children like to give them orders, like them to talk back. And I was wondering if the whole storytelling, or even for some programs where they do news for children, if there would be actually something that they would use or like. Don't they have to see it?
I know the BBC's done a lot of research on this, or has done some research on this. I haven't done any research on it, but so I don't know. But we did talk to people who were using it as families. But I think part of the issue is there's not much content out for children yet. So there's a few people who've developed content for children. I think the BBC obviously has with its interactive CBeebies games, dancing games. I think some American publishers are looking to do that too, but I think we don't know enough. I certainly don't.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm afraid we have to stick to schedule, but we have a break now.